Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Cult Films Podcast. I'm David Smith and tonight we continue our Hellraiser retrospective with this very special episode. We're very lucky to be joined by Nicholas Vince, aka The Chatterer. Nicholas is a veteran horror actor who made his name playing the part of the Chatterer in the first two movies. He's also worked on Nightbreed and Book of Monsters, along with numerous other horror movies as an actor, writer, or director. He's also published volumes of short stories, including some in the Hellraiser universe, and he's written both Hellraiser and Nightbreed comics. And finally, he's also got his own podcast. He's a host on The Chattering Hour, so we got a heck of a lot to speak to him about. When I first emailed Nicholas, I was saying our interviews are normally about 20 minutes, and we spoke for almost 75. As such, I thought it was only right we give him his own episode, rather than being the opening act for Bloodline and Inferno. So without further ado, here's me and Alasdair chatting with the Chatterer. Hello Nicholas, firstly thank you very much for coming on our show.
It's my pleasure, David, lovely to meet you.
Now, I often see you at events. I've seen you at Fright Fest numerous times. I've watched you introduce films, like when you introduced the Perishing. I also know that you do your own horror podcast. You appear in numerous horror films, numerous short horror films as well. I've even seen you do a horror quiz show that you're one of the contestants on. I was in the studio audience for that. Basically, you're a big horror guy. What does the horror community mean to you?
What is the horror community? It honestly means fun and friendship. I mean, you mention Fright Fest in particular. I really missed Fright Fest in the last couple of years and wasn't able to attend properly this year when we were actually back. And it's like, oh God. I mean, I did spend some time in the pub and get to meet a few people. That was, caught up with a few friends. But it's like, there's nothing like actually being part of it properly. But also just, we're very lucky, I think, in terms of, by we, I mean the guys who acted in Hellraiser. Our fans, and I say the word fan, and I'm immediately reminded that Clive Barker doesn't like the word fan, prefer because it's short for fanatic, but prefers the word enthusiast. So let's say Hellraiser enthusiast. Because they're interested, like yourself, they're interested in the work and the world that we created. So that's what I think enthusiasts mean to me is fun, friendship, and intelligent conversations about horror and love, death, sex, all those things that horror is basically based around.
And I'm right in thinking that Hellraiser's obviously that's still the thing that people would most often associate you with, right? And what do you reckon the lasting appeal of this movie is? Because this is decades after it's come out. The film's roughly the same age that I am, and at the same time, me and Al, we both have it in our top 10 horror films of all time. Absolutely love it. And it just seems to always be on TV. It's always in rotation. You see Pinhead merchandise, all these conventions. What do you reckon's the big appeal of it?
And we're going to mention the Chattering Hour. And I know one of my guests pointed out the fact that movies in the 1980s benefited from the rise of the video machine. These were the films, the first ones that actually went on to video, and so people could take them home and watch them again and again. They weren't. So there may be an element of that kind of repetition, and that helped movies of that era. But I think it's deeper than that. I think because that doesn't explain why people who are much younger than yourself love it. And who didn't see it when it first came out, who didn't, literally would have no idea what a video cassette is, unless it was in a history book. So I think there is something about the film that touches people very deeply. I mean, I mentioned sex being part of what, the attraction of horror is. And it really is a film about a love triangle. But also repression and desire and all those things about that it really is about exploring the further regions of experience. So I think at the time, it was very groundbreaking, and now it still feels, because it's not all about, yes, there is, I kind of forget that it is actually quite explicit in many ways for its time in terms of the gore, because I really don't see it like that. I just feel that, it's a love story with monsters, and so I think it touches people very deeply, obviously, and just the Cenobites are weird and exciting, and as I say, I know some people find them very sexy and very attractive, and so I think it's got all those things going for it, and it basically speaks about universal truths about what it is to be a human being, to what it is to be an adult and to fall in love and to have a passion and then be denied that passion. So yeah, universal themes basically.
I would absolutely agree with that. I was saying in the last episode that I think it's like Ibsen meets Dante in a way. I think like in terms of this
very
small
good. I like
story,
that.
in terms of this very small story and just it's really good mythos, but it's really transgressive as well for its time, because we're looking at a movie where the main sort of baddies, and I say baddies, but everyone likes them. They're the villains, I guess. We've got our sort of pansexual characters who are all in sort of BDSM gear.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, wow, like it's like for when that came out, it's very unusual imagery.
And was, yes, for when that came out, it was very, and actually hasn't really kind of been replicated since. I mean, apart from within the Hellraiser mythos itself, but that whole, as you say, it really was groundbreaking at the time. I remember meeting people and becoming friends with people who were into BDSM, who did the Skin 2 magazine, and did the balls, I think they called them Skin 2 balls, which are basically huge, great big parties for people who are into fetish wear. And that was, obviously these things existed. There was a quarterly magazine called Skin 2, and it was, really high quality photography production, but it was definitely kind of top shelf magazine. It wasn't pornography because it was just fetish wear, but it was definitely kind of in the adult section. But that's all there was. It's not the sort of thing you'd see on TV. I remember being blown away one year when they showed the first 2 Hellraiser films at Christmas at midnight, in the slot where they used to show the Ghost Story films when I was growing up in the 1960s. It was kind of like, oh, this is very cool. Hellraiser has attained that kind of status now, and this would have been in the kind of early 2000s when that happened.
I was reading earlier today that you and Clive Barker go back many years. I believe you modelled on the front cover of Books of Blood back in the 80s.
I did, yes, indeed. That's how Clive and I started working together. Basically, they had published the paperback versions of the Books of Blood, and because they had done so well, they decided to do hardback editions, and which I think for the time was kind of unusual. What you normally used to get was you get the high-end hardback first, and then they would publish a paperback version a year or two later. But this was kind of done in reverse because it was so popular. Stephen King obviously had reacted very positively to the books. So when I met Clive, he was literally painting the covers for the hardbacks, and he just asked me to model for him. So yeah, you can see me particularly on volume 4 of the original.
I hope everyone's Googling that right now.
Yeah. If you go to the Clive Barker Revelations website, they've got all the different versions of the Books of Blood covers, and yeah, you can definitely find it there.
So did you know him when he was writing Hellbound Heart? Because I know that came out a year or so before he decided to make a film.
Yes, right? Yeah, absolutely. So I'd known Clive for about 3 years when we made Hellraiser, and I did know him. I don't remember ever talking about it. I mean, I remember talking to him about things like Weave World and so on. And I think like most of his friends at the time, I'm sure, one had the experience, and I'm sure this is probably true of many writers, is that when we were hanging out, right, we were chatting and so on, and Clive's very intelligent, as you can tell from the books, and I'd have conversations with him like, oh, that's mind-blowing, that's really interesting. And then when you see the book, when it was published, I thought, oh yeah, I remember him talking about, that, philosophically talking about a particular topic. And I just thought, oh, that was obviously at the top of his mind when you were having that conversation, because he was writing that particular section of it. So I kind of recognized, I guess, some parts of the book when I read it, and I must have read it before we started filming. But I think it was very clear that when I got to meet the guys from Image Animation, the guys who did the makeup, that Chatterer was very different to the way it was described in the book. It's not very different, but there was a slightly different vision as to what the Chatterer Cenobite would be like.
Yeah, because in the book, the descriptions are relatively vague, something that's come up a lot with the casting of a new Pinhead. And so when you saw the original designs for the Chatterer, what did you think when you first see what this character is going to look like?
I mean, I really thought it looked amazing. I'd seen a paper, I'd seen it drawn by Nigel Booth, the guy who actually physically sculpted it. I do remember, so my first sight of the Chatterer makeup was, because basically the way it works is they do a life cast of you, they create a plaster bust of you, and then the makeup artist sculpts the mask on in grey clay, sculpts the what you're going to wear, the creature, on that bust. I clearly remember walking into the studios of Image Animation and seeing the Chatterer for the first time. I already knew that it was going to be a difficult makeup to wear. I'd been warned right at the very beginning it was going to be a tough gig in terms of being able to see or speak or hear, and the complete lack thereof. But so I was blown away by it. I just thought, yeah, this looks really very, very cool.
So how long were you in the chair for?
It was actually really quick because it wasn't stuck to my face. So unlike female Cenobite and Pinhead, the pieces weren't glued to our face. So it was a physical mask, which still exists. It's still, I think, just about hopefully lasting this long in the hands of a private collector now. So basically there was the hole for the mouth, and then there was a slit up the back. So it just kind of went on my face. So they put the teeth in my mouth first, and then they put the mask over my face. And I think it was about half an hour.
One of my questions actually is about the makeup effects for Chatterer, which look fantastic. It's such a fearsome, grisly, it's a raw look. And it's just the mouth, because you would not have been able to see out that at all. And that's something that actually, for me personally, it adds some of the scariness of the Chatterer, is that there's no eyes, yet because in the film, Chatterer acts like he can. Like when Kirsty Cotton's in front of Chatterer, it's the motions of the grabbing the back of the head and the two fingers in the mouth. And I'd imagine that would have taken some rehearsing to do, but it's such a brilliant and impactful opening sequence for the Cenobites.
Yeah, I was really like, yes, the fact that the Chatterer, I mean, you'd seen Pinhead kind of through the swinging of the, so you're aware of Pinhead, and let's face it, Pinhead was on the poster, so everybody knew exactly what Pinhead looked like walking into the film. And I think, yeah, it is it's a great entrance for any character. Because you've got that whole build-up before you've got the whole thing of the box opening and then the light, the lamp shattering, the blood flowing upwards into the thing you put in your arm. I can't remember the technique.
The IV.
The IV, thank you, the intravenous, yeah. And the flower opening on the television. Yeah. And, the corridor and the sound of the baby. And you've got, before you see the Chatterer come in, you've got at least a good 3 minutes of tension going, oh shit, what's happening? Holy fuck! Who is this guy? And I think when I talked with Clive originally about the Chatterer, the idea was that he was actually going to be a lot more agile. And he was kind of leaping around the set, and he was more of a monkey. The chattering was the chattering of a monkey's teeth, was what was in Clive's mind. But obviously, once we put me in the costume and the makeup, that wasn't going to happen. So you get this, like the rest of the guy, he becomes this very measured, controlled performance. And there is, as you say, I think is a lot more powerful because he's not rushing forward. He's not like a Freddy quipping and running down the corridor. Well, he does in the second movie, but in the first, he's just that presence walking towards the camera and towards Ashley, who just played her part superbly.
Yeah,
because
she did.
The way that a monster is sold in a movie is by the reaction of the other characters. If they are the people, you've got the Chatterer and he's just by himself. It's an extraordinary look. But it's Ashley who really sells just how terrifying he is, I think.
Pinhead is the main sort of star. It's very striking visual, but I think in a way, because as I'm sure you know, there's 9 sequels now to that original movie. And I was actually saying to David earlier that there's something about like Pinhead character is obviously carried on throughout the series, but in a way, sort of spiritually, I think the Chatterer has as well, because in 4 we had the Chatterer Beast, then there was a torso Chatterer, there's been a female Chatterer, so there's a lot. Most of the films have had some sort of bite to them.
Yes. I only discovered that a few years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago. I think I was looking it up on Wikipedia for some reason, and I was like, oh, I hadn't realised. That is so cool. There's the version that Gary Tunnicliffe did with where he's just got one mouth really twisted up like that. There is something about it that is completely iconic.
I heard that Clive Barker based it upon your reconstructive surgery that you had when you were much younger. Like, did you know that, or at the time?
I didn't at the time. It was only afterwards that I said, he pointed this out to me, I think, oh. I hadn't made that connection. It's that thing. So basically, I'd had this major reconstructive surgery when I was 19. And I had told Clive at some point before either the writing of the book or the making of the film that I got all excited because I'd seen this documentary on TV which explained the process, because obviously I really didn't know what it looked like whilst I was under anesthetic, and I got very excited about discovering that this was how it was all done, and I was explaining to him and so on. So I can honestly say that without me, the Chatterer wouldn't look the way he does, and what I went through.
And so when you're putting on the outfit, you're putting on the mask, right? I've heard some people say that to do a sad scene, you got to make yourself sad. To do a happy scene, you got to make yourself happy. How did you get into character as a demonic, as a demon from hell? How did you get in character?
It's a really good question because, as I was saying, because there was such limited movement, and to be honest, it becomes a very technical. Now, Doug Bradley has spoken about this. Now, obviously, with Doug, because you've got voice, you can see his expression, etc. And Doug will often say that basically Clive kept on saying "do less" to him. And as far as Chatterer is concerned, it's like I just let the makeup do the work. It became a very technical performance. It's just like, Nick, walk, hit your mark, chatter your teeth, put your tongue in Ashley's mouth. Those were the things I could do, and those were the things that were asked of me. I think Clive was very clear that he wanted actors rather than stunt people, and that's nothing to do with stunt people. There's no detriment to stunt people who are amazing. But he was very clear he wanted actors in the costumes and the makeups, because we do, I think because I don't remember I had a background story as such. In fact, I've written short stories too, with different ideas as to how the Chatterer came to be and what he was like after the making of the film. But at the time it was my first film. I was just so excited, and it was kind of like, okay, how do I make this work? What am I going to do with it? I suppose it's the art of being present, that whilst you are there on set, in front of the camera, doing your thing, half your mind is saying, Nick, walk forward, hit the mark. The other half of it is just bringing the concentration and the being and the history of the character. So, if I'm out of makeup or something like that, what I usually have done is written up my own biography, if it's not given to me in the script, about who this character is, what it is, what they want, what it is they're trying to do. So I will have gone through that. Obviously you never get to learn that in the film, but as an actor, you have to go through that process just to say, okay, this is what is, just so you can be present at the time on set.
Really what I find especially kind of, I think, horrifying about the Chatterer character is as much as what you see is what you don't see, in a sense that visually striking, if you saw the Chatterer, you wouldn't really want to be alone in a room with that guy. In the sequel, when there's the confrontation with the Channard character and it's the human forms of the Cenobites are revealed, the standout one for me is actually the Chatterer, because you find out that this is a young boy. And conceptually, that's horrifying because of all the implications that go with that. To be converted and turned into a Cenobite from such a young age, it is just horrifying. It creates there's a story there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, yes, and that is why basically when it happened, and I have spoken about this before, that I was just so pissed off because I thought, great, you mean, when we heard that we were going to be revealed, I thought, great, you're going to see my beautiful face. What do you mean I'm a child? What do you mean I'm a child? Peter Atkins, screenwriter, what the hell are you doing? And I spoke to Pete Atkins about this afterwards, and he said, Nick, to be honest, I think I had a conversation with Clive, and Clive just said, I'll make one of them a child. And he said, yeah, that's going to be Chatterer, isn't it? And it's like, oh, okay, thank you. But you're right. I think it's, well, as I say, I've written a short story called Prayers of Desire about it. And it is that idea of a boy growing up in hell. I have to say, you mentioned the Chatterer beast earlier on, which is basically a dog-like creature who's a chattering dog. Led to one of my favourite convention questions, which was from a 9-year-old boy, funnily enough, because in America they show horror movies to much younger than you tend to see them over here. And he wanted to know if the Chatterer beast was Chatterer's dog in hell.
Oh, wow.
And because that is just so cool. That is just such a wonderful idea, because he's a boy. Every boy should have a dog. And it's like, yeah, that is definitely my favourite. That's definitely my favourite.
That's no canon. I was reading a short story that was meant that I was told was by you, but now I'm doubting it, which was a version of the Chatterer where the Chatterer was a comedian.
Yeah, no, it's by me.
Oh,
Let's
okay,
look, see.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll put my hand up to that one. So that one was written for Fear magazine for when Hellraiser 2 came out. I was still smarting at that stage. The fact that I didn't get to be in the film. You keep on putting me under all this makeup. What are you saying? I'm not good looking enough to be on camera. What are you saying, guys? And that was kind of a very tongue-in-cheek. I like the idea and so on. The more recent one is the Prayers of a Desire that came about 3 years. Gosh, time flies when you have a pandemic. 3 years ago now, because nothing really happened much in the last couple of years. And,
so it's Luke C, the canon one then for the book, and this is for the film then.
Well. Yeah, Luke C is definitely, Nick was pissed off and wondered if he could get away with it, so he had to go. And I was asked to write a short story, and I think that was the best I could come up with at the time. More mature reflection on the genius of actually having it's. Once I'd actually got over myself, probably took me about 10 years. It was kind of like, actually, you know what? There's a really, really interesting story here, and there is something really very disturbing that I can play with as a writer. So, that's how Prayers of Desire came about, which, if I actually get my act together, it won't be before Christmas, but I am working on a third volume of short stories, and that's going to be reprinted as part of that.
I'd just like to add with Luke C, the last paragraph had me laughing out loud at work, particularly the last two lines. I was like, that's brilliant. Yeah. I hope Clive was a fan.
He has actually, bless his little cotton socks, and he probably wasn't thinking of that particular story, but Clive is very encouraging of all. Clive's very encouraging of everybody. He's very encouraging of my writing, particularly, by which I mean particular to me and our friendship. So, I think he must have got over it. I hope he smiled when he saw that. It was a cheap gag, yeah.
So, horror fans love monsters. As something you said earlier, Cenobites are among the most iconic monsters of the last century. But when you see the Chatterer on things like T-shirts or those pop-head figurines, Funko Pops...
Funko Pops, I love them.
Are you sort of able to distance yourself from the creation? Like, do you see that as that's a model of me? Or is it that's a model of the character of the Chatterer?
It's very interesting. It's very difficult. I think particularly... I was talking to Alice Krieger on my YouTube show the other day, and we were talking about her makeup as the Borg Queen, and she used the word collaboration between her and the makeup artists. And I think this is true. We talk about the backstory of the Chatterer and my experience definitely fed into Clive's creative process of the teeth and those real, the rest is pure Clive and Jane Wildgoose, who designed the costumes, and Nigel Booth, who actually sculpted Chatterer, and so on. So I think when I look at things like, the 18-inch animatronic Chatterer, and that's the one that probably has the most emotional impact on me in terms of saying, okay, this takes me back. And it's behind my green screen at the moment, that I've got the 6-inch NECA toy as well. The Funko Pop just makes me smile, just makes me laugh, basically. I just think I think Funko Pops are extraordinary. There's a wonderful documentary about the history of them. I find that fascinating as well. And I think they're amazing. So I think, yes, some of them, there is definitely an emotional connection and reaction as far as I'm concerned.
When you heard we're going to be making a sequel to Hellraiser, the sequel came out a year later, so I assume this was quite Did you hear about it while the first one was out at the cinema, or was it quite quickly afterwards?
It was really fast. It really was fast. I think the moment, we knew that the studio, which was New World Productions, were very pleased with what Clive had delivered in the first house, because they gave him more money to shoot more scenes. After we'd done principal photography, they actually then increased the budget so he could do Frank's resurrection through the floorboards, all that animatronic sequence. That was shot. So we knew that they were very pleased with it. And then the moment it came out, the initial, and it had, thanks to Steve Jones, who was the unit publicist, who worked really hard on this. It was in Time Out magazine. Everybody knew about Hellraiser before it came out. So did incredible. It did well. I'm talking about over here. I don't know what the process was in the States, but basically it gained a following, and Pinhead in particular gained a following very quickly. So yeah, and within a year we knew we were back. We knew we were going to be doing more of this, which was really exciting. Great as an actor. I mean, it's like, oh, you mean I get paid again for acting? This is wonderful news.
I assume you were immediately excited when you heard about a second one in production.
Oh yes. Yeah. And apart from, that obvious reaction, it's like, Clive is a really good friend of mine, and I was very pleased for Clive. We were all very pleased for Clive because it's, it shows the fact that we're not the only people who love him and love his work and think he's absolutely extraordinary, is that other people are excited by his work as well. So that's always great to hear.
To comment on both the first and second Hellraiser, they do look like they were filmed back to back. The sort of visual continuity of the two films is fantastic, but you just don't get that often. My questions actually would be about a deleted scene for the sequel. I think you know where I'm going with this one, which I think we had the female Cenobite and Pinhead, they're in hospital gowns and scrubs, and there's the Chatterer comes into play during a certain elevator sequence, sort of reminiscent of the elevator scene in Aliens, I find. Yes. Just wonder if you would like to talk about that and what was involved there, and what was the intention behind that scene?
With sequels, you obviously want to step up your game. It was a bigger budget. I mean, we made Hellraiser in Cricklewood and Dollis Hill in North London in a tiny studio. And then when we came to do Hellbound, we were at Pinewood Studios. It was a very different experience in terms of where you were and the scale of it and so on. The thing with Chatterer, I think basically we've gone back to Clive's original idea of making the Chatterer more mobile, more agile. Funnily enough, it's, as I mentioned earlier on, by keeping him blind and keeping him still, in a sense, he's more powerful. If he can run, he gets eyes and he runs down, and there's a sequence where he's running down the corridor and he chases them into lift and so on. And I think it actually, funnily enough, he loses power. So all those scenes were cut. And what I particularly like now is in the version that you see is that you hear the chattering of the teeth, and he's hidden behind the pillar, and then he comes around the pillar and you suddenly realize he's got eyes. How the hell did he get eyes? He's got eyes. He can see me now. He could, I think, oddly enough, I think that actually works in his favor, the fact that they decided to eventually cut that stuff. I don't know why it was cut. It was that's between the director and the producer. The director was Tony Randall, the lovely Tony Randall. But yeah, I filmed it. I did as I was told. But I think, it just didn't work as well as they hoped. And for me, that's probably, from my perspective, that's my understanding why it wouldn't have worked.
Whilst keeping this, of course, all very positive, there's now been 10 Hellraiser films. Firstly, have you seen all of them?
No. I have to say I haven't. I've definitely seen up to Bloodline. I've seen the Chatterer torso. It's great because I think that's the one with Craig Sheffer in it, who, of course, I worked with on Nightbreed. And I definitely remember watching the first 4. I've seen bits of the others. I do love the fact that if I ever get to meet Henry Cavill, I can say, hey, we were both in Hellraiser movies.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah. That would be right. It's like, hi, I'm Nick. We've both been in Hellraiser movies. There would be a lovely conversation. I don't know what he feels about his work in that film. But yeah, so no, I'm afraid I haven't. I can, and that's partly based on a lot of fan reaction reviews I've seen of them.
What you have done, though, is expanded the mythos with your own writing, with the short stories, and also with a comic series, I believe, you did for Marvel. So Yeah, you can be linked to Robert Downey Jr. too.
Yeah.
But like in terms of like sort of building up this mythos, what's that process like for you? Like, was there ever kind of a concern about, would Clive be a fan of this? Would this be part of his canon, or is he just it's everyone? It belongs to everyone.
Clive is extremely generous in terms of letting people play in, I was going to say, the garden of his delights, the garden of his imagination. And I don't know what the contractual, whether, I have no idea, because of course Clive had to sell the rights to Hellraiser in order to get the film made. And he is getting them back soon. But quite what was, how that came about, I don't know. But what I do know is that he was very involved in the Hellraiser stuff, and he was doing other Marvel comics, and Marvel was working closely with Clive on other comics as well. So what was it like? Basically, you're given a Bible to work with, and the way I got to write is that basically I took the money that I'd earned on Nightbreed and went across to the States and bowled into Marvel's offices in New York, asking to see Dan Chichester, who is the editor of the Hellraiser comics, and saying, I've got this story, would you like to buy it? And he did. And then I had to say, that's great. I've no idea how to write a comic. How do you do it? So Dan taught me through the Marvel method of writing comics and gave me a script.
Of course, I never even thought about how different that would be from doing short stories, having to kind of imagine what would look like on the page visually.
Yes, yeah. And it is fascinating, and it is known as the Marvel method, created by Stan Lee, with the likes of Steve Ditko, and basically because Stan Lee was writing a lot of comics at the same time, which is basically you write a script that says, okay, page 1, frame 1, here's the action, here's the dialogue. This is then, so the script writer then gives it to the artist then puts together the action and the pages, and which may not be exactly what was described on the page. So then the writer goes back in and literally writes on a photocopy of the pages where they expect the writing, the word bubbles and the thought bubbles and the action bubbles to contain. So yeah, it's a fascinating process.
And was there kind of almost like a sense of responsibility when you were doing it, thinking, I'm part of Hellraiser already?
Yeah, sorry, coming back to your original question. Yes, I think, there's a sense of responsibility. Yes, always. I mean, I've worked a lot with Clive's work, both Hellraiser and Nightbreed, because I wrote Nightbreed comics as well, and I've written short stories, as you say, based on Hellraiser, because I love the work. I love, he's one of my dearest friends, and I just love, the imagination and the breadth of the imagination, what it opens up. And of course, for all of us, if you're working with an existing property like Hellraiser, there are certain rules, there are guidelines, but within that, as an artist, you have to, it becomes strongest when you actually follow your own path, and within the framework that is given to you, you manage to speak your own voice. I'm thinking particularly of one of the Hellraiser comics. We were given a brief to write 4 comics, which would be, when I say we, 4 writers were given 4 episodes each of a 16-episode interlinking stories, which Dan had written the kind of the through story, and saying, okay, you've now got 4, I think it was 4 episodes each. And one of them, I remember I wrote a line about standing in crazy balance, and that human beings crave certainty. We are really bad at change. We do not, as people, we are very bad at this kind of thing. We're better at it when we're younger. The older that we get, the more set in our ways we tend to get. Generally speaking, huge generalizations. And I wrote this line about standing in crazy balance when you look at life, and which is a quote from Mervyn Peake, the guy who wrote Gormenghast. His line was, "We stand in crazy balance at the edge of time." And I just like the phrase crazy balance. And a fan letter, not to Marvel, but in a completely different comic called Cerebus the Aardvark, quoted this particular thing and saying, "This is how I feel every time I tie on my gun as a black policeman in Los Angeles." And this was just a few years after the Rodney King riots. And it was that thing of like, I thought, okay, when I wrote that, I was being as true to myself as I could be within the framework as Hellraiser. And I think because of that, that connects with another human being and describes their experience. So I think, yes, the best way to honour the work of Clive is to actually work within the framework, but actually speak your own voice.
I've seen that you've worked with Clive since with Nightbreed, which you mentioned a few times. A very underrated movie. I've only ever seen the Cabal cut, which I watched at Fright Fest, actually.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah, so I've never seen the butchered version of it. I never watched.
Yeah, the theatrical, yes.
It seems to have really found its audience in the last decade or so. It comes up in conversations all the time now. You've also got some very, very good makeup.
Yes, by Neil Gorton in that particular case. Neil, who went on to do the makeup for the rebooting of Doctor Who, starting with Christopher Eccleston. So Neil's company was responsible for that. Yeah, again, incredibly lucky that Clive decided to cast me again in that film. Sorry, what was the question? What was the tenor of the question again?
Oh, it was just about your experiences of working with Clive again, making this movie. How you reflect on that film?
I love it, like yourself. Funnily enough, I was talking about it a lot yesterday in another interview, and it was like, I think what I love about Nightbreed is the joy in the monstrous, the celebration of monstrosity. Just before lockdown, I did a one-man show called I Am Monsters, which is all about working on Hellraiser and the Chatterer and the experience of the full details of the operation that fed into the design of the Chatterer, and working on Nightbreed and what that was like, and working on Hellbound when Margaret Thatcher's government made it very difficult for gay people. This was on top of AIDS. So, typical Tory reaction to a health crisis, do something ridiculous. And it was, so I think Nightbreed was a real answer, by Clive to saying, yes, we're different, but there's something to celebrate here. A line I've used, and I'm going to keep on using it because I like it so much, is like, when we celebrate difference and do not fear it, we create peace. And I think that is what my view of Nightbreed is, that it's, as I say, it's the joy of the monstrous. It's the joy, a celebration of difference and all that brings, and when I say difference, I mean, and it sounds slightly weird when I talk about, refugees who've come to this country over the years and the different cultures who've come for whatever reason, whether it be the Windrush generation or whatever it is, they bring so much to our country in terms of our culture and our food, now, just extraordinary things, and our art and our music and so on. we have got to learn as humanity to understand, to celebrate one another. This is what, this is the thing that is going to save us. This is the thing that is going to help us deal with all the shit show that we've made of the planet. And I think this is to me why Nightbreed is so important to me. And as you say, I'm really pleased that we've had these different versions of Nightbreed now. And in the director's cut, if you ever got a chance to see the director's cut, which I think was on Netflix at one stage, that is much closer through the work of Russell Cherrington, who put together and everybody else in Occupy Midian and so on, who that long tale of actually bringing us these things. I am so pleased that Nightbreed exists. And that the monsters really are the good guys, because of course in my mind they always were. In Frankenstein, I'm thinking of the Universal films, apart from Dracula perhaps, but even then he's a kind of sympathetic, he is cursed to do what it is. He's kind of looking for love. In such a bad way. He looks for love in such a bad way. But, when you think of the Frankenstein creature, you think of Larry Talbot, the Wolfman, and the Wolfman can only be killed by a silver bullet fired by somebody who loves him. That's the real twist in the Universal Wolfman, which I love American Werewolf in London. Do not get me wrong. I think John Landis created a wonderful movie, but I really do feel he chickened out when it was the police that shot him rather than Jenny Agutter, because I think it would have been a far more powerful moment if Jenny Agutter had to actually face that moral dilemma.
You've now spoiled the film for me.
Sorry.
I completely.
Yeah, spoilers.
No, not a spoilers thing. I completely agree with you. Yeah,
I never thought of that before. Yeah. And, there we go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Next, my visit the slaughtered lamb, I'm going to be thinking, Nicholas, he's right on.
Just if I can add to that as well, I suppose in the Hellraiser context, with what you're saying about these, like Frankenstein and Dracula, they're having this desire, this draw for something to make themselves complete. It's what I love about the sort of the Hellraiser film, that the driving force of the story is Frank Cotton and Julia, who are both themselves lacking something. Like Frank, I have to say, he never really gets what he wants, whatever that is. Julia's wanting him back, and do you see what I mean? There's that.
It's interesting. It depends how you interpret, and spoilers, the end of Hellraiser, when Frank Cotton, is strung up and goes, Jesus wept.
Brilliant scene.
And you can't help feeling, this is his ultimate.
Yeah.
This is like, okay, now it makes sense. These are the extremes that I'm actually wanting, these people driven by their passions.
Can I say very quickly, there's a moment that I like in that scene where it's Andrew Robinson, and he's realized he's been tricked. You, the Cenobites, have got him, and he's pulled out his flick knife. Wait, I might be getting that wrong. There's a sequence in that where it looks like Andrew Robinson, obviously Frank wants to leave.
Yes.
He doesn't want the Cenobites back, but Chatterer, you put your hand out, you put your hand on his chest and push him back into the room. And I know you chatter, you don't speak, but like if that motion had words, it would be, where do you think you're going?
Thank you so much. And I'll let you into the secret. I was really worried by that moment, because when we did it, it was like, technically it's known as a dabbing movement, and it deliberately doesn't lack power. It deliberately lacks power. It's not a shove. Well, because I couldn't physically do that. If you look at him, if you watch the film very closely, you'll see that Chatterer isn't looking at him directly. He's kind of doing that. And I think that helps cells. Like, what do you think that you're doing? Well, the reason that's happened is that's the eye I could almost see out of. So to be able to actually hit him with that, I needed to have my head slightly like that.
That's brilliant.
And it's like, and as you're saying, it wasn't until I'd seen the film I watched Hellraiser when it first came out. I went with my parents to see it when it first came out.
Was that a weird experience?
It was my mum's reaction, which I thought was the best of all, because she laughed at quite a bit of it. And I thought, oh, actually, you're getting jokes here. I'd not, because Clive has got a really wicked sense of humour. It's like, you're not taking this too seriously. You're enjoying it. You're not taking it. And at the end of it, I said, so, well, Mum, what did you think? She said, it's very silly, dear. I thought, yeah, I have told Clive that. He does know that story. He's met my mum. He loved my mum. But yeah, no, thank you. I'm so pleased. But again, it's that I watched that film and all I could see is the think, oh, I should have done that differently. I remember was what would happened on that day. You know, that's set. That isn't really the house. And you look at it from a very technical perspective and your immediate visceral memory, because it was only 6 to 8 months since we'd actually filmed it when I got to see it. It would probably be 10 years before I just sat down and thought, oh, hell, this is a really good movie. Because I'm now no longer watching it from my experience, but just watching it as a member of the audience and then watching it as a filmmaker myself in terms of, I've made some short films. And you look at it with a director's eye, you look at it. And there's a fabulous moment in when Julia has brought back the first victim. And if you look at that, that one shot, I think that shows the genius of Robin Vigeon, who's the lighting cameraman, and Clive, because Julia is literally standing either side of a stained glass window and she's hesitating between light and darkness. She's literally standing on a threshold between, and I just think that is wonderful. That to me, it is absolutely amazing. I've gone off on one of my usual things.
She's my absolute favourite character in it. It's,
Julia, yeah, Claire,
yeah,
isn't she great?
It's like, yeah, aside from just being an absolute style icon, you know, she sells the fear of it so well, and just the dark romance aspect. It's so good.
And you know, this was her first. I mean, this is a lady who's done Royal Shakespeare. She's a wonderful, wonderful actress and a wonderful human being as well. Because I mean, Claire Higgins really stood up. You know, always said it's not right that only middle class children with rich parents can afford to go to drama schools. We are missing out on a whole generation of people from working class backgrounds who can actually afford to go to dance, who can afford to do arts courses. And she was working towards that. But I love that performance because she really literally goes from the girl with the slightly country accent to this woman who's taking a claw hammer to somebody's head. A wonderful performance.
In the podcast I did with David, sort of mentioned that one of the things I love about this film, it avoids becoming a slasher at every opportunity.
Yes.
And it could have been a knife, but they went with a hammer. What I'd love to share with you in this, actually, a little something that I personally feel about the Hellraiser films, and something about the first Hellraiser that differentiates it from the subsequent sequels. And that, for instance, when you're watching like The Incredible Hulk, for the movie, you're waiting for Bruce Banner to turn into the Hulk. And there's like the human bits in between. You think these are the boring bits. Finally, he's hulked out. And with a lot of the sequels in Hellraiser, there's a lot of sort of sitting around waiting for the Cenobites to show up. And what's brilliant about Hellraiser 1 is that the story, just with the regular living humans, is so engaging that I love the whole story. And then it's, extra treat, the Cenobites are here as well. And that's one of the things I love about it. That's
beautifully put, Alasdair. I think I completely and utterly agree, is the fact that if you took the Cenobites out, there's a love triangle.
Yeah,
there's a love triangle. It's just that one of them happens to be dead.
He didn't let that slow him down.
Yeah.
It's the only one that you could almost do on stage, I reckon. It'd have to be a pretty
Yeah.
big budget production.
I would love to see a stage, but we talked. I mean, over the years, we've fantasized about the idea of an opera, Hellraiser the opera.
I would love that.
I'm not a huge fan of opera. I like light opera. I like things like Die Fledermaus and Cavaliera Cavaliera Rusticana and Il Pagliacci. And Gilbert and Sullivan. I'm a huge fan of Gilbert and Sullivan. But I would love to see a proper opera done of Hellraiser, because I think the passions are big enough. I mean, the opera is about big passions and these big sets. And I remember talking with Doug Bradley about this, and either he was talking about there had been discussions at one stage about there being some sort of stage version of it where basically you start with the lament configuration, the puzzle box, this huge thing on stage, and it slowly opens up to reveal the house where all the action takes place. And I love that image. I love that idea, but I'd love that. Somebody write an opera for a really good. You can do it with Sweeney Todd. Stephen Sondheim, here's a challenge to you.
The thing is, now that Clive Barker's got the rights back, and I mean that's something that really enthused me, to use his word, because we see with some of the sequels where, all right, there's one every 7 years because they have to make one to retain the rights. Yeah. And there's just something about knowing the original creators got it again, he cares about it, that he's back with it.
Yes, and I think I think he's kind of from memory had a love-hate relationship, and I think the hate relationship was the fact that it had been ripped out of it. Well, not ripped, because he made the decision. But what people did with his creation and his and I think this is why I like one of the Hellraiser comics. If we go back to those for a moment, if you can manage to get the first edition of the first issue of the Hellraiser comic that was done by Epic back in the early 90s, there is a short story, because they're all like 10-page comics. They're all short stories. And there's one in there called Simply Fetus, and I'm trying to remember the artist's name. People can Google it, but basically it's called Simply Fetus, and there are no Cenobites. But in my mind, it's a Hellraiser story. It's actually a story told without words, which I think makes it even more powerful. It is literally just panel after panel, image after image, which allows you as a reader to really invest in it, and so on. So I think, there is so much that can be done with Hellraiser in terms. So I'm really hoping there are going to be some really good. They've just finished filming the reboot, and I'm so excited for that. I can't wait to see it. I really cannot wait to see that. I love the idea that they've gone back much closer to the original book, where the leader of the Cenobites is described as a female, and Pinhead is described as having a high female voice. And I think this is. It's like all good. At the beginning, we were talking about the fact that it has lasted over decades, and I was trying to express the idea. It deals with principles of being a human being, our desires, our passions, our wants, our needs, in both sexual, in terms of companionship, but sexual fulfillment, however, and taking it to extremes and sensation and so on. So I think there is such a rich seam of interest. Books of Blood. Hulu did Books of Blood recently.
Yes.
It's on Disney Plus in the UK. I was like, I actually get to see this. And I think they did an incredibly good job of it. And I thought that was really, really good work. And absolutely fascinating. And I love it when you take an author's work and do something very exciting with it.
Firstly, by the way, we've actually gone like 3 times as long as I was planning.
Yeah.
No. Honestly, thank you so much. This is going to be the introduction for Inferno and Bloodline Inferno. This will just be its own episode now. And honestly, it's been great fun. If I may, I've got 2 quick questions left.
Sure.
So, in the last wee while, I know that you've directed some of your own films. I know you appeared in Book of Monsters, which was awesome, and I've seen you in some shorts. There's a really good short you were in, which I've embarrassed to say I've completely forgotten the name of it. You were sat down in the chair for most of it, saying that it was like a kid that's coming in and
Mindless.
That's
Casey
the one.
Bonham's Mindless. Yeah.
Yeah, you're very much a horror guy, but what sort of horror really appeals to you? What sort of horror makes you go, I want to get involved, whether it's you creating that horror or being a part of the horror?
I've always used the term intelligent horror, which is why, speaking about Mindless, it's not about jump scares. Jump scares are an important part of horror, don't get me wrong. And let's go back to Hellraiser. Let's go back to the entrance of the Chatterer in Hellraiser. This is masterful. By the time you get to see the Cenobites, and not just Chatterer, because Chatterer is like John the Baptist. I really don't mean to offend Christians when I say it like that. Chatterer is the first one there. He is the person who leads the way and introduces the rest of the gang as they come in. By the time you get to see Pinhead and the female Cenobite and Butterball and so on, you've had all this stuff going on. You've had Kirsty physically. You've had that tension built up. I mean, it's a masterclass in building tension. I look for moments like that. What I particularly liked about Katie Bonham's Mindless is because, apart from anything, it was a really beautifully written part. It's the fact that he has very few words, but also Kate Danbury, who's in it with me as well, playing the carer. She had actually been a carer. And knew what this was like, and Katie went on to produce the London Horror Festival. I must give a shout out to her for the London Horror Festival, London's largest and oldest festival of
you're
live
a
horror
patron for that, I
performance.
believe.
Say again?
Yeah, you're a patron for that.
I am the patron of it, yes. And huge kudos for Katie to running it for about the last 5 or 6 years by herself. Again, that's, I am a real horror guy. What excites me, horror theatre I find incredibly exciting, because none of that, it being up on screen, you can be 2 or 3 feet away from the action. You can get involved in the action because the performer on stage looks at you and says, okay, it's, now. I've always been attracted to horror because it really is love, sex, and death. Love, sex, death, and starshine, as Clive has it in one of the short stories in the Books of Blood. I know it ends starshine. Love, death, and starshine. Those are the fundamental things that we deal with as human beings. Basically, chick lit is for daytime. Horror is for nighttime. Yeah. We're dealing with the stuff that happens in the dark, whether that dark be the dark of the night or the dark of the human soul. And I think when you just think, light good, dark bad, that isn't the only story. Dark can be very, very bad, but so can the light. And, and things, you have to understand the balance and the interplay between these things and these forces. So what attracts me to, I've said it many times before, my favourite horror film is The Mask of the Red Death, directed by Roger Corman, starring Vincent Price, based on 2 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe, which is basically a meditation on a pandemic and how do you deal with that. And if God is so good, where's God? Therefore, this world must be subject to Satan. Therefore, it makes far more sense to pray to Satan rather than it does to the Christian God. those are the things that, I like the big questions and that speak to the human condition.
And so you're a drama school guy yourself, I believe. When you're doing stuff at drama school, is there would there have been like a bit of a snobbery towards genre things? Or like did you always feel quite empowered to go down a horror route, or was maybe part of you that's like, but it's not Greek theatre?
It kind of is Greek theatre.
Yeah, that was a terrible example.
I think listen, when I was making a movie. Hell, I was making a movie. That was the only snobbery. Was when you left drama school, the idea was that you went off, and I've heard Orlando Bloom talk about this. What you did was you did repertory, and if you were lucky, you then got to do TV, and then you got to do films. I kind of went straight into films. Simon Bamford and I more or less went. Well, no, Simon did theatre, and I had done some theatre. Simon Bamford did theatre with Clive Barker. So that's kind of where the snobbery went. The fact that it was a horror film. I loved horror. I've been reading horror stories since I was a kid. I'd been making Aurora models of Frankenstein and Phantom of the Opera and the Wolfman. Dracula rather than Frankenstein. So I wasn't conscious of such a thing because hell, it was paid work and it was a film, whatever happened.
Something horror seems to go through kind of peaks and troughs within the public consciousness. I remember speaking to Neil Marshall a while back, and he was talking about how when they were funding The Descent, they had to describe it as a psychological thriller to the distributor. I was like,
well, yes, this is why Clive had to get money from America to make Hellraiser. It was filmed over here, but all the money was American because in the UK they all wanted to make A Room with a View. So yes, in that aspect, yes, there was snobbery. I obviously wasn't aware of that because I had nothing to do with getting the money together. But I learned recently, that this was why it was New World Productions, which, funnily enough, was originally owned by created by Roger Corman. So yes, there was that kind of snobbery in that. So the snobbery was in terms of the money, rather than the artistic stuff.
As one very last question, I was going to ask about your will hopefully again be a touring show of I Am Monsters. So I believe at the moment you were doing an American leg, is that right?
Yeah. So basically, the idea was that I would do the one-man show, and then when I did conventions in the States, I would do that rather than doing a Q&A. I would do the show. So whenever I was invited, so that hopefully is what will happen when I get to go back into the States again. That's kind of what I'm hoping will happen. Fingers and everything else crossed.
Aye, absolutely. And how's that been for you so far? Because it sounds like a very personal show. You're going up for talking about your years when you were younger, like being gay at a time when there was greater social stigma, and also about the idea of monsters and not really fitting in. So I guess wondering, like, how's it been sort of, like, I assume the audience reaction firstly has been very positive, but from yourself, what's it been like becoming the star of the show there?
Oh, who doesn't want to be the star of the show? You're talking to an actor. How sweet and naive a question is that? It's really weird. I mean, it was terrifying because, and you look at the script, you think, I don't really want to listen to that. Why on earth do they want to hear that story? Are they really interested in that? I've been revisiting the material just recently, actually, in the hopes of doing something else with it, which I can't talk about. But I can say, yes, I've been looking at the material again and looking at expanding it. And it's difficult. It is actually difficult. There are moments in the show that are moments in my life which are bloody painful, and I don't mean physical pain. Very difficult. What I was particularly pleased about is because obviously, This is my story, but this is also the story of my friendship and inspiration by Clive Barker. Just before we did lockdown, I was able to do the show in Las Vegas with Clive in the audience. I'd been consulting with Clive throughout the writing of it. I think, can I do this? Is this okay? Have I remembered this correctly? Again, as I say, he was just being extraordinarily encouraging. And so, yeah, at times it's what I was talking about earlier on, and this is true of any artist. Particularly with horror, you tend to write from a place of pain. That's kind of what the gig is if you're dealing with horror. That's not to say, even comedy, actually, if it's really good comedy, part of it must come from a place of pain. Because otherwise, because that's actually what we're all trying to deal with. And I think all great art celebrates joys. I tend to watch an awful lot of comedy stuff. I love light things. If I had nothing but a diet of horror, I think that would be seriously damaging to my mental health. So when I writing my stuff, then yes, it can be quite challenging at times. So it was challenging. It was fun. I had wonderful, wonderful reactions to it. Including we ran a competition to come and see the show for free. And the gentleman who ran it admitted that it was the first time he'd been out of the house in nearly a year because of his agoraphobia. And he was so happy and he was so excited and he was so pleased to meet. So that was really very, very moving. So yeah, it's wonderful. I would love to show it again. I love doing it live to audiences again. So I'm hoping that it's going to be. Obviously, what I'd originally hoped was that I would be able to take it on tour through the UK. That was what I was hoping to do, was to just take it to smaller theatres, and particularly the theatre where I grew up in Horsham. They've got a little studio theatre in their Capital Arts Centre, or the Capital there. I'd really love to do the show there. So hopefully, cross fingers, it will be, it'll be the return of I Am Monsters.
If it's ever up near northeast Scotland, we will both be in the front row.
Yeah,
absolute promise. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. Been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And just before we go, I'd like to add, actually earlier on when you were talking about is there any God in this world, or is there's also Satan operating in this world, you reminded me of one of my favourite quotes. I can't remember who it was from. It's been in my head, so I can't pay attribution, but it runs along the lines of there's someone lying on their deathbed, and the priest has come round and has said, "Do you renounce Satan?" And the person lying in the bed goes, "Now is not the time to be making new enemies." I've always quite liked that quote.
It is a famous last words, isn't it? I think I can't remember who on earth it's not Balzac.
I've been trying to.
It's attributed to somebody as being their last words.
Yeah. And I suppose I would like to share with you, my thoughts on just the original 4 Cenobites, that when you're standing in a row, that iconic look. And I know that they didn't all transfer all through the sequels. And I find a double-edged sword in the one sense where you get new directors, new creators, and they want to express themselves, and they create new Cenobites throughout the series. On the one hand, I like that, but there's also something quite special about the original 4 Cenobites.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a bit in part 3 where Pinhead says they're a shadow of my former troops, and I was like, yeah.
Forgotten that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nicholas. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me.
White Bat Audio.